Hi, it's Bright. How you doing? I'm here in my workshop today. I've got some workmen at the front of my place making a fair bit of noise where I've been filming, so I thought I'd come down the back where it's a bit quiet. This is where I do modelling with my son. I had listened to the last video that I made and it wasn't quite the video that I planned on making. Of course, I didn't plan on getting upset like I did or angry, and what I was conscious of is that you can't suppress that stuff. I'm at a point in my life where it's important for me to just let things out, and I could have edited it out, but I was happy to keep it in because that's where I'm at now. That's part of my real life. What I did notice, however, was that there were some things that I said that probably, I know how I think, so I don't need to explain to myself, but I was conscious that there were some things that I had said that probably didn't make sense or could be confusing. So I thought it might be worth clarifying some of those things and maybe just trying to give you a deeper appreciation of what the creator races are like. And often when, sorry, I've got some sand in my eye, often when people talk about aliens and when people are interviewed about aliens, what they seem to most want to know is, what do they look like? And if I were to go back to 1991, 92, I was probably more keen to understand what they look like as well. I would say that I had thought a lot about aliens, and I'd done my science degree, had nearly finished it at that point, and I was fascinated with anatomy and morphology in general and biology. And so I wanted to understand what aliens look like, and if they lived on another planet, how gravity and different atmospheres and different suns, moons, environmental conditions changed how they looked. And I guess that would have been a priority for me then if I was trying to understand aliens. As it was, the things that I was conscious of then didn't give me enough information to really ponder that question. But what I've discovered as I've got older is I don't really care about what they look like. I don't care how many digits they have on their hand, or what their eyes look like, or what shape heads they have, or whether they have teeth, or whether they have a spine or an endoskeleton or exoskeleton, and whether they can shape shift and all that kind of stuff. I don't really care for that. And I suppose that the same thing is true of my interest in the natural world. I can recognise and see beauty in things, whether it's a tree or an ant or a microbe. But I'm more interested in the thing itself. I used to study microbiology, and I was working with sewage, and I would take a drop of sewage. I made these micro hooks, these glass hooks, and I would fish out individual bacterium from a drop of sewage. And as I was doing it, I would see these whole ecosystems with rotifers and paramecium and many different types of bacteria, sulfur-eating bacteria, and these other filamentous kind of bacteria. And what interested me most, even back then in 92, 93, was these ecosystems and how these organisms interacted in their behaviours. Believe it or not, microbes have behaviours. It might not be documented, but if you watch them long enough, you see these behaviours. And I've always been fascinated with insects, and when I watch insects, I'm fascinated by their behaviour, how they communicate, how they go about moving in their world, how they interact with not only one another but with other species, their habits, how they feed, how they fight, mating, reproduction, how they grow from young, the larval stages, all kinds of things. And whilst the morphology is interesting, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm fascinated by the morphology, the physical structure of, say, insects, microbes included as well, I was so fascinated that I would spend hours on a light microscope studying insects and, on a dissecting microscope, and on a light microscope studying microorganisms, or using a scanning electron microscope. These things did fascinate me, and I still find them fascinating, but slowly I began to become, I guess you'd say, an observer of what a thing is really like. And I have always been fascinated with birds as well, and I can go out with people I know. It was the same when I was at university, and spend time with people who are fascinated with birds, and they'll spend most of their time naming the birds and trying to identify the bird by its call or its colour, whereas I'll spend time watching a bird and trying to see its individual character and trying to get a sense of the behaviour of that species and the habits and what seems to excite that species and what causes fear, the different kind of emotional states, I suppose you'd say. And when I was at university, we were taught, I'm not sure if they teach people to think this way now, but I was kind of appalled. We were taught that so many different organisms didn't have feelings, didn't have emotions. You know, your cat didn't feel. All of these kinds of really ludicrous kind of things, which in some sense justifies a scientist's desire to, say, test whatever model they want on an animal. For example, somebody wants to study or map brain function, so you take a marmoset monkey or something like that and you open its skull and you stick electrodes into different hemispheres and different parts of the brain and you do things to the monkey. I suppose if you believe that primates, apart from humans, don't have feelings, then it's easy for you to do that. You have no guilt, no remorse, nothing, really, no connection. And yet I know that many scientists aren't like that, but there is this scientific mindset that many other living, conscious creatures don't even have feelings. And many of them supposedly don't even have conscious awareness. And I just don't buy into that. I remember watching small microorganisms, paramecium, and rotifers, and I can't remember half the names of these organisms I used to watch. But they would interact with one another in sewerage. That was their habitat. And it wasn't just, this little rotifer comes up to this little rotifer and has a sniff and, smells the chemistry and reacts. There was some kind of recognition of something other than self. And there was also a recognition of what kind of habitat it liked. There was some sense that it had I had a sense anyway that even these microorganisms had a sense of self and relationship, whether it's relationship to something else or relationship to environment. And so as I was growing up in my early 20s, I had this fascination with animal behaviour, and I was also fascinated with plants. I'd studied a lot of plant physiology. And I remember reading a book which is now quite famous, but I read it probably in, I don't know when it came out. Maybe I read it in '89, The Secret Life of Plants, which I guess to some extent tried to talk about electromagnetic fields of plants and electrochemistry to kind of explain plant feelings, plant behaviours. But I had a sense that this was true because I'd watched plants, how they respond to things, and I don't think it's just stimuli. I think a plant has some kind of sense of self-awareness, and as I've got older, I've come to see more of that and believe more of that. Once I could separate the scientific dogma that I had been conditioned with, had been trained with, I was able to look at plants quite differently. So for me, as I was growing up, I was able to look at plants and animals and see not the fundamental difference that this thing has a different morphology to that thing, which has a different morphology to that thing. And there was a point in my early scientific career when I was studying microorganisms and studying 16S RNA and doing this kind of lab work, working out taxonomic relationships from one microbe to another and trying to identify them. So I was looking not only at biochemistry but at genetics as well. So I was very acutely aware of difference and separation and genetic differences and these kind of things. But as I got older, I lost interest in that. And I lost interest in the fact that, a new species had been discovered and suddenly we could map what it was related to and its special, unique qualities in terms of its morphology and biochemistry and genetics. And I was more interested in the overall essence of something, its isness, including its behaviours, including its emotions. And so my interest in the natural world really began to expand. I found myself able to be in places, and I didn't have to know what they were called scientifically, what plants and animals and geological landscapes were called. I didn't have to know that. I was able to connect with something. And in a sense, I guess what I was doing is I was trying to transcend duality. I didn't know that then. And I suppose a lot of people will tell you that one of the aims of moving beyond duality is to do away with separation. There is no you and it, us and them. And I wasn't aiming to do anything like that, but I found myself incredibly connected to things. And it was as if I could go out, see some kind of animal and almost feel what it was feeling. I had many different experiences of being able to sense what an animal was feeling, how its heart was reacting, how parts of its body was feeling, and how it was feeling emotionally. And I guess that basic empathic ability is something that I've tried to cultivate. I wasn't always conscious that that's what I was doing, but by bringing about that connection, that's what I did. Anybody who's got a cat or a dog or an animal that they're very close to will know that you can cultivate that empathy. There are many stories of dogs going away looking for their masters who have gone far away, or dogs coming out or waiting at the door to greet their masters when they get home, knowing that they're going to be there and they're there, and it's sort of almost impossible to explain. Somehow, at some level, some subtle conscious level, they're aware of this. There's an intimate connection. Our own cat, for example, and the previous cat that I had, she would she spent most of her time indoors, but she was allowed outdoors. There wasn't really any wildlife to attack, so we were happy to do that. and we would go away for days at a time and come back. And I don't think it was just that she knew the sound of the car, because we were on a busy highway, very hard to distinguish that. She would be sitting out there waiting for us, and so excited to see us. And the cat that I have now is exactly the same. She'll wait by the door. She'll know when you're about to walk in. And when we're about to leave, she runs to the windows to see us off. Everybody who's had an intimate relationship with an animal knows that kind of empathy and that sympathetic connection that you can have with an animal. And when you hear scientists say things like, cats don't have feelings, cats don't really have many emotions, none at all actually. Cats just don't really experience much. They're not very conscious at all. Well, anybody who has an animal, who has a really good relationship with that animal, knows that that's just bullshit. That's just a lack of the scientific paradigm to be able to embrace a broader reality. We're becoming very anthropocentric when we think like that. So I've always tried to understand what a thing is like, and the same is true in my work with people. I've worked with a really wide range of people as a therapist, counsellor, and running different types of groups. And whatever background a person is from, whether they had cancer, whether they had a chronic disease or a disability or acquired brain injury, whether they're an Aboriginal person or a white person, whether they're an alcoholic or an addict, what I tried to do is not superimpose on them the therapeutic model that I was working with and presuppose what they might be like just from first couple of minutes of an encounter with them. What I tried to do is to build a relationship from the heart, and that doesn't work with everybody, but I think I can say I was able to do it with most of my clients, most of the people I worked with, to build a relationship from the heart and to try and use my mind and my heart to understand them and to be with them and to make a connection with them. And you're told that in professions like social work, that, or any of the other therapeutic professions, that to be professional you can't be sympathetic or empathic or personal or use touch and any of those kind of things. And what I found is that's crap. You know, there's a time and a place for all of those things. It's the human connection. I'm going to come back. My cat is in the workshop, so I'm going to let her down. Come on, Misty. It's all right. Talk of the devil. This is Mishka, my ragdoll cat. She hasn't been in here very often, so she's curious. There you go, Mishka. Anyway, so we're taught to weed those qualities out of ourselves as workers, and I really found that very difficult. I saw, when I first started, I saw people going overboard and being unreasonable and being too personal, using too much disclosure and sometimes forgetting who was the therapist and who was the client. But what I slowly discovered was that there's an important place for intimacy and disclosure and empathy and even sympathy, and for feeling intensely what is being shared with you. There's nothing wrong even with a therapist having tears in the right context. So I discovered that I was at odds with a lot of people and how they worked. But what I found is that I really connected well with people who came to me for help. And I think I was able to offer them, I don't don't know how you describe it, but I think I was able to give of myself and help a lot of people by being transparent and honest in that way, and giving where it was needed. But the key was that I tried really hard to understand every individual and see every individual as unique. Sure, it's very easy to see patterns, and anyone familiar with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of disorders, the DSM, whatever one it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think is the new one, will realise that many people in the world of psychology like to classify people and see patterns and treat people according to those patterns, hence the whole model of pharmacology as a response to the DSM. I think that is an absurd kind of approach to the human condition based on symptomology and very little else. I mean, we all experience lots of different repeating patterns and emotions, and sometimes they occur in patterns, in repeating patterns, but that doesn't necessarily imply that we suffer a disease that supposedly is the same as a physical disease. So I really hate that way of looking at the world and looking at so-called mental health or emotions. And what I've struggled with is to be able to deal with other people who wanted to classify people that way. Careful. But I guess, why am I telling you this? I tried to understand people just the same as I try to understand animals and plants, and I tried to build a relationship with people in the same way I would with plants or animals. Of course, it's different, the individual context is different, but essentially you're opening your heart and connecting with something and not seeing necessarily separation or difference. There's no power differential there, and that is, in some sense, that's a problem associated with classifying things, although it's a useful thing to do, to be able to look at something and say, this is its morphology, this is what we think it is, this is its biochemistry and its genetics. And one thing you learn as a scientist is that genetics can say something different about an organism compared to, say, the biochemistry or the basic biological morphology. And these ways of classifying, they help us make sense of the world, but what they also do is they create barriers, and they create barriers that prevent us from really connecting with things and connecting with the essence of something. Like, this is called a cat, and I've called her Mishka, but that's not who she really is. That means friendly one in Russian, by the way. That's not who she really is. That's just a descriptor, and that's convenient for me, and she recognises the name. But a cat is just a name, a label. It isn't the essence of the thing itself, and that's not her. And if I was to describe what she was really like, it would be incredibly difficult. I could try and do it in a few words. I could say that she was warm and cuddly and loving and empathic herself, and curious and mischievous and playful, never bad-tempered. I could say all of these things, but they don't really tell you what she's like. They point in the direction what she's like. But if I was to get caught up in her morphology, I would say that she's got 2 arms, 2 legs, or 4 legs, I should say. She uses them like arms. 2 ears, a head. I wouldn't say that she's humanoid-like. I could use that as something to say that she's not like something else. I would say that she's got a tail and she's got a black face and whiskers, assuming that you knew what all those things were. But the reality is that that morphological description doesn't really tell you anything about the relationship that I have with her or what I know of her. All I'm telling you about is the surface. So this is something that I want to convey about aliens, and particularly about the creator races, is that the core human problem that we have is one of separation, cat fur, separation from everything, be it our world, be it plants, be it animals, be it each other. That is the core problem that we all deal with in some way. If I was to say, for example, what is the core problem for nearly all of the clients that I've seen in my lifetime, the thousands of people that I've worked with, I'd say it's essentially relationship problems. Relationships with self, with understanding of self, with loved ones, with the world at large, with work colleagues, with all kinds of things, but it's essentially relationships. Hello, Mishka. So our core problem is one of separation and seeing us and them. And because of that, when we look at our world, we look at our world through this lens of separation, and we see all the different things that we've classified. And some people live that way, and they live in that world and that structure. And other people don't, you know. Some people have pets. Hey. And some people breed animals, care for the animals they breed. Some people grow plants because they love doing that. And some people have a sense of caring for other humans. So we have this sense among some of us that we're not separate. A serial killer or some other kind of person suffering sociopathy. Once again, there's the label and the human condition turned into something else. But somebody who has an extreme sense of self-importance and a lack of value attached to, or sees lack of value in anything else, that individual has created the ultimate separation, forgetting that they rely entirely upon the world outside of themselves. Hey, Mishki. But, you know, we see this all the time in our world. We see it in war. We see it in big multinationals coming in and wiping out indigenous races. Oh, cat fur up nose. We see it in corporations who are only interested in profit. You won't fit in there. She does fit in there. We see it all through human behaviour around the world. We see this idea of us and them and the importance of me. We see it with bullies. We see it with high achievers, people who think only of their own importance. And it's something that's bred into us. We're conditioned to see separation. Anybody who's really developed spiritually, sorry, she's making me laugh, she's trying to get into a space about that thing. Anybody who's developed in some way spiritually sees the importance of interconnection and connection as a whole, and most people therefore recognize that we are always in a relationship. Humans are a herd animal. We function best in relationship. In fact, the human identity is created by relationship to other things, by relationship to other humans, by relationship to plants, animals, by relationship to work. Although many of us try to be islands and try to function autonomously, and I've been guilty of that myself in the past, the reality is we can't. And anybody who does try to be that way develops some kind of distorted way of functioning, be it cognitively or in a relationship kind of way, such as the serial killer that I mentioned earlier. We don't easily understand the importance of relationship or cat fur. We don't easily understand the importance of separation and how separation leads to dysfunction, and separation leads to more hurt, more suffering. And ultimately, the greatest healing for humanity is to overcome that separation, to see that everything is one. It's not a case of wanting oneness, it's a case of acknowledging that everything already is one. All the good, all the bad, it's all already there. What's lacking is the sense of awareness of that. And when we have that, we suddenly have this sense that everything matters, everything depends on everything else. If I hurt my brother, it hurts me. And you've seen some of my pain in this last video, from the hurt caused by others and my cancer coming back more aggressively. And I have found it difficult to contain that hurt and have said things that may be hurtful to others. But throughout the latter part of my life, I've tried to let go as much as I can, to forgive, and even to ask for forgiveness. Because I realise that we're all connected, and it's okay to have anger, and it's okay to feel that for another person, but at some point we have to let it go. And we all know that. I'm not going to go into that. So, when we have separation, we hurt ourselves and each other, and it leads to irresponsibility, which is why we have a planet that's so fucked up. For example, in China, we have huge problems with pollution. And there are two reasons for that. One is because China is a very old country. It's had a population for a long time, much like India. And that population has gone exponential for a long time, despite the single child policy. And the second reason is because of corporate greed, and that corporate greed in some way has distanced the people from the fact that when they need things, when they need basic resources, something's got to be produced, and one of the side effects of that is pollution. So we have all these different kinds of examples of how separation has led to problems in our world, and the only way for all the human dramas to end is when we do away with separation and start reconciling our differences, see our common humanity, see our connection to Earth, see our connection to the cosmos. Now, I don't ever see that happening for humanity, but I think that it will happen in different ways and in small ways. So why do I keep talking about this? If you want to understand aliens, if you're curious about aliens and you're curious about the creator races, you need to get past the idea of us and them, and you need to get past the idea of just being interested in the morphology of aliens. You need to be interested in what are they really like. What are they like in their essence? What are they like in their behaviours? What are they like in their emotions? Just on that last subject, when I was doing my study in the late 80s, early 90s, I didn't think aliens would have emotions. I thought that emotions are a human byproduct. And I didn't really understand very well either the depth of emotions that animals have. And of course that's changed that perspective for me. And I've realised that all aliens have emotions, but some may not be recognisable to us. And some are way beyond, way more developed than the emotional states and the emotions that we have. So what I would like to say to you is, if you can get past the idea of separation, see that we are all one. And a really simple way to do that is to picture Picture your human body and use your mind, do a visualization. Picture yourself going in, and let's take a hand. Picture a cell in your hand going into a cell, only to discover that inside that cell it contains organelles, even smaller parts of the cell. And if you go inside of those organelles, you'll find genes. And if you go inside of those genes, you'll find things like DNA, RNA. And if you go inside those materials, you'll find organic compounds: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. Just keeping an eye on Mishka. She is mischievous. Hey. And if you go inside of those organic compounds, organic is carbon, if you go inside of those basic elements, you will find subatomic particles. If you go inside of those even further, you'll find smaller particles. And if you keep going all the way down, eventually you'll reach, well, who knows what you'll reach. My feeling is that you'll reach some kind of pure energy and lots of empty space, lots of nothingness. Scientists are hell-bent on the idea of a Higgs boson, and apparently in recent weeks they've proved the existence of that, the fundamental particle. I don't believe that's true. So if you look at a human being, you realise that a human being is mostly made up of emptiness and energy. Now science may not look at it that way, that's how I look at it. And there is very little difference, I think, between energy and matter at the most fundamental building block level. And ultimately, if you would look at a human being, you would say that a human being is composed of trillions of cells, and we're also composed of billions of other life forms, microbes. And if you look at a whole human being, you see one human being. But a human being is composed of trillions of different parts and billions of different organisms, but you see a human being. You may think that you are a solid mass that cannot be broken up into smaller parts, but I'm not sure the real science of this, but supposedly every 7 years every cell is replaced in your body, and if you chop off a finger, that part is dead and it won't grow back, but you're still there. So where are you? So in addition to this biological form, there is some kind of consciousness residing in the body, and the great question of who am I, or what am I in spiritual traditions, and it's very simple. You ask yourself, what am I? You wait for the answer, and you then question that. Oh, okay, I'm bright. Okay, who's bright? Human being. Okay, what's a human being? This body. What's the body? All these cells. What's the cell? And so you go through this in-depth contemplation, questioning process of discovering what you are, until ultimately you reach a sense of your true nature. And so a human being is also something else. A human being is a consciousness, or a subtle consciousness, as the Buddhists would say. We are something more than the body. Some people would say a soul. Maybe a soul is a kind of subtle consciousness that carries the imprints of everything that you were. My belief is that the body is actually a manifestation of the soul, rather than the other way around, the body containing the soul. The body is a manifestation of the soul, and not the only possible manifestation. So you can see that if you want to understand oneness, just look at your own body and you'll see that you are one, but that's an illusion. If you look deeper, you realise that you're not just one. So let's take that further out. If I look at my suburb from, I don't live in a suburb, but if I look where I live, from the air, you'll see tiny town in the mountains. If you go further up, you'll see the state of Victoria, and you don't see all the animals and the plants and the human beings in there. And if I go further out, you'll see the country of Australia. You can't see the differences there, and the differentiation and the borders and the differences between bodies. And if you go further out, as I experienced during my encounter, well, several times, but the one encounter that really stands out was on January 19th, 2011. Now she's being mischievous. When you see the Earth from space, you see one planet. You don't see difference. And the further out you go, the more you see oneness. If you were to see our solar system close up, you would see different planets orbiting the sun, and meteorites and asteroid belts and comets and all this kind of stuff, and space. And then zoom out further, you would see just a dot. And that entire dot is our solar system, just the one. And if you were to zoom out again into interstellar space, you would see lots of different, millions of different solar systems. Mostly you would recognize the suns because they're much larger. And if you went further out again, you would see a region of the galaxy. And if you went further out again, you would see a single galaxy. And anybody who's seen the deep field images that came back from Hubble, and I think there were 2 different batches of those over a different time period. Basically, they pointed the Hubble telescope up at one of the dark, empty pieces of sky, pieces of the heavens, and found that it was teeming with galaxies. So picture yourself looking down at a galaxy. You will just see this single dot, and then further out you'll see a cluster of galaxies. Further out from that, another dot, and clusters of galaxies, and so on and so on. And the further out you go, the more you see these scales within scales. And if you were able to penetrate the depths of the entire universe, and I'm not sure that there is an edge, but we could imagine seeing just one dot that is everything. At some point perception breaks down, I think, but I think in essence we can say that everything is one. And while we might recognize matter and energy and supposed dark matter, which may well just be another form of energy, there is also this emptiness. And we recognize black holes, which may well be the absence of matter. Who knows, maybe it is true on the other side of a black hole there is a white hole where matter is being created. Maybe on the other side there is a big bang of sorts. And there are some people such as, I think, Nassim Haramein, who suggested that every piece of matter contains a black hole, micro-singularities. So, for example, a human being contains all these micro-singularities, basically holding matter together like this, and somewhere it's being created, possibly. I don't know, I mean, this is all conjecture. The point I'm trying to make is that, now she wants to get out. The point I'm trying to make is that collectively, everything is one. When we start breaking things apart and separating, we are trying to escape the one. We are trying to separate from the one, but there is no separation. Everything is intrinsically part of the one, which is why when we realize that consciousness is not bound, we're able to access anything anywhere mentally. We're able to see anything, visit anything. And people are starting to do this kind of work now in remote viewing, and prior to that with techniques like journeying. And shaman have been using this for a long time in what they also call journeying. So when we realize that everything is connected, consciousness at some level is beyond the body, there's no separation, then we can perceive all that is possible. I have to let her out. I'm coming back. Go out there. So once you've got a sense of oneness, then you can see that we have this enormous cosmos. And as I tried to say in the last video, even though it's tempting to classify a universe here and a universe there, or an M-brain, or whatever you want to call it, overlapping with another one, and I've talked about dimensionality before, intra and interdimensionality, although it's tempting to put these labels on things, and it is useful to put them on things, the ultimate reality is there is only one of everything. There is just one collective. And many of these aliens see that, understand that intrinsically. It's something that they've spent billions of years understanding, or it's taken them billions of years to understand that, to get to where they are now. And so for them to do all the things they do is simply about understanding the nature of reality and working with that. I don't even want to say manipulating, because I think it's working with. Whereas our understanding is that, oh, you're in a universe or in a solar system, you can only do this or do that, and you've got this technology, you're limited to that. And many of you will be familiar with Michio Kaku's classifications of type 1 to 4 civilizations. You know, it's a great idea, but I actually think the whole model is flawed because it's imposing a human kind of way of understanding how these civilizations might work. I think that civilizations are wide and varied, and as I tried to say about the types of creator races, there's many ways we can look at how they work, but I think that beyond that, there is a fundamental understanding of reality, and they have different variations of that understanding. And that then allows them to use different energy forms, or to manipulate matter, or to create matter, create space. What we lack is the understanding of their way of perceiving. So I just want to come back to where I started. I talked about the idea of morphology and going beyond that and trying to understand what the aliens are like. One thing that I hear in a lot of our conjecture about aliens and trying to make sense of so-called alien abductions and contact experiences is all of this stuff that we readily project on them. You know, they've depleted their resources, they're coming here to take our resources. They've depleted their genetic material, they're coming here to take our genetic material because they can't survive. All of that is our human projection on them. It is not, as far as I understand, as far as I can tell from my relationships with the aliens, it's not a reality. It's what we project on them to try and make sense of things. So if you were to consider that we look at these different beings and we see morphology, insectoids, humanoids. I've heard people talk about mineraloids and vegetoids and amphiboids, and you even have bird-like species supposedly. So you have all these basic loose classifications, which is a useful reptoid. All these different classifications are useful tools for saying that's what they're like, but that's not what they are, and it's superimposing something that humans understand. I mean, we classify our basic world into, certainly the animal world, into basic types, insects, reptiles, birds, amphibians, can't remember the rest, primates, so on. And so we want to look for an easy way to understand what's out there. And so what I would like to say to people is, it's a useful starting point, but if you get stuck there, you'll limit your capacity to understand them, and you'll limit your ability to empathize with them. So what I would like to say is it's important for us to get beyond that. So if you're somebody, for example, who has an experience with an alien race, this is what I would say to you. You're going to go through many different developmental stages in that relationship. You'll probably, unless you're a very wise person, you'll probably start with fear. You'll start with a particular range of emotions that are bound to fear. Because something is happening to you that's beyond your control. You can't make yourself safe in your house. You can't protect your family. You can't protect yourself. These beings are doing things to you that you don't want them to do. So this is your starting point. Early on, you'll probably have a lot of confusion, questioning about whether something is real or not, whether it actually happened, whether those memories are authentic. And it's always good to keep those questions in mind even down the track. But you'll have a lot of fear. And your perception may well get stuck at that point of fear if you listen to other fearful people or other judgmental people. Because you're going to be conditioned by what you're exposed to. And if you expose yourself to all these horror stories or this preconception that these things are different and hostile, then that's what you'll assimilate. These are the ideas that you'll have. And that's how you'll approach the relationship as well, with hostility, with anger, aggression, with fear. But if you allow yourself to slowly let go of the need for control, the need to fully understand, and the need to project onto them, and allow yourself to have these experiences, what you can consciously do is cultivate a sense of curiosity. And a good way to do that is to look at people that you come in contact with on a regular basis. And I suggest this. Take somebody you love, take a perfect stranger, and take somebody that you really intensely dislike. And try to look at them with absolute fascination. Look at them and try and understand what makes them tick. Be fascinated by them. Notice their behaviours. Don't just get caught up in how they look. Notice their behaviours. Notice their actions. Try and figure out how they think. Try and figure out what they're feeling. Try and understand their history. You may not have much to go on. You might be working in the dark in terms of having very limited knowledge, especially with a stranger. Sometimes the case even with a loved one. But work with what you can and see if you can cultivate that sense of fascination, curiosity, and a willingness to understand, a willingness to look beyond the veil, to rip that veil off and to say, oh, I see something else. And if you can do that, you'll slowly stop projecting. You'll stop putting your perception of what they're like onto them rather than what they're actually like, which is almost the same as what we do when we look at morphology and what animals are supposed to be like. Rather than connecting with the thing itself, we connect with its label and put that on it. So maintain that fascination if you can. And as you grow through your experiences, you'll find that you can do the same thing. You can apply that fascination to the aliens, and you can start to become curious about them and to be fascinated with them and to start asking questions. And even if you're not conscious, to start looking back at the memories with a fascination. And slowly as you grow, and using the once again the same metaphor for three people, a stranger, a loved one, and somebody you dislike, take those people and imagine cultivating compassion for them, and see if you can actually feel some degree of empathy in your heart, some warmth in your heart for the suffering of that person and for who they are, some appreciation for who they are, some appreciation for what they bring to the world, and try and see at least one good quality in that person. It's easy for a loved one, much harder for somebody you dislike, because you've got to drop all of your projections, chuck them out, and try and see the person as they really are. And you may have limited time to do that, but see if you can do it. Once you can do that, you really can start to cultivate compassion for that person. So then as you continue having your experiences, try to do the same thing. Try to have empathy, warmth in your relationships towards those who come to visit, even if you're in an uncomfortable situation, going through some procedure or something like that. Try to cultivate this heartfelt compassion. And as you do this, particularly when you start with that fascination, but once it works up to compassion, you'll find that the fear will dissipate. The fear will be replaced with a genuine curiosity and a yearning to meet with the other. So this idea that the other is something separate, that is scary, foreboding, controlling, suddenly turns into the other is something that you want to get closer to. And then later in your relationship, and this will all happen naturally, I think, once you start doing that, you can start genuinely wanting to understand and to know those beings that you are with. You'll get past all the exterior and you'll want to know what they are like themselves. And when you do that, you'll begin to have a different kind of relationship with them. You'll feel it from here. You'll still have this curiosity, but it will be more of a heartfelt curiosity, and you'll feel a deep connection with them, and you'll come to understand why they are having a relationship with you, why they have singled you out. Not saying that you're anyone special in 7 billion people, but in some way you are special to them. They've singled you out, maybe singled out another 1 million people, but they've singled you out to have a relationship with, and maybe not just for this life, maybe over all of your lives. So if you allow yourself to open your heart, you can get past the fear, you can cultivate genuine curiosity, fascination, and then start to cultivate relationship, and then feel compassion and warmth and tenderness, and you can even start to feel love for those who come to visit you, who've made it a priority to visit you. So I just want to say one thing and then tie this all back to the creator races, because I wanted to say what the creator races are like. I wanted to say something about what is a human being. So I think I've given you some sense of that by talking about the different scales that we exist on, from subatomic, sub, all the way down, all the way up to all that is. And we sit somewhere on the lower end. Think about a human being this way. We are this body that is one. We are also of the body of all that is, which is one. We have within us all of these tiny parts which are essentially composed of some form of energy and emptiness, void, nothing. What it is, we're not really sure, but for now, let's call it nothing. We also exist in a universe that is full of nothing, and that all that is full of mostly nothing. We also have this mind, and as far as we can tell, this mind is contained within the body, but there are many different aspects of mind, and one aspect of mind, and anybody who's explored subjects like subtle energy, subjects like distance healing, subjects like remote viewing, any of those kind of supposedly paranormal things will realize that there is an aspect of mind that is connected to all that is beyond time and space. And that mind is not contained, it's unbound and infinite. So a human being, in one sense, is very much this localized entity here, but also this unlocalized, non-localized entirety of all that is, both at once. And I guess in in one sense you would say that we are the dual and the non-dual, not one or the other, but both. But because we do have this dualistic component to us, we have a body, and we have aspects of us that are contained in the body, we're subject to decay. Like everything else, we're subject to impermanence, and one day all of this will be gone. And we also have emotions which are created while we're in this body, and they're linked to the mind or consciousness, and in some way some of those will also decay. Everything within the body depends on everything else, dependent origination, as the Buddhists would say. And so we have this cycle of impermanence going on through all of existence. And in a human body, that means the body will one day decay, and all that we think that we have will disappear. Many people work hard for a wonderful home, fantastic car, lots of money to do things that they want with, fame, fortune, glory, the whole thing. It's all subject to decay. It's all impermanent. It will all disappear one day. And so the Buddha was right when he said that basically is a fundamental teaching of the Four Noble Truths, that suffering exists, and then the reason for suffering is because we're attached to things that we mistake for being permanent that are actually impermanent. So most human beings suffer in that way, but not just human beings. There are other beings that suffer in that way, but other beings also suffer because the body decays. Regardless of the other attachments we have, we do have some attachment to the body, and the body experiences pain, so we can't avoid suffering. And so whenever you meet one of these beings, know that these beings are also subject to decay and impermanence, and they will suffer pain. And that will help you to cultivate compassion and love for them, because they feel what we feel, they experience what we feel in the same way. The difference being is that many of them are aware of these transcendental aspects of the self, and so they can let the body go, and they can move into these other states or these other forms of consciousness or subtle consciousness. And they can do that in life as well, whereas we're not so good at that. Something else I was going to say about all that, and I've lost the plot. Hope you're still with me. Right, okay. So, coming back to the creator races. As I said last video, they're all very, very different. And there are some, this is me trying to classify, and it's very difficult to do. But there are some races that I would still call creator races who, as I said, create relationships with individuals and nurture them and care for them. And they may never be known, but some are known. I myself have such an entity who's part of my life. And some humans I know of two, one in particular, her entity visits every 2 weeks. So they're an active part of their life, and they're aware of their life. And so some of these beings, although they exist as biological organisms, they also have all these other expanded abilities that humans are only now discovering, or formalizing, should we say, like remote viewing. They are able to exist beyond time and space as we understand it, to move beyond what I've said is the veil, was called the veil of death, or the window of death that we put in the way. They're able to move through space without space as an obstacle. And so these are the beings who can nurture. But then there are the other beings who create celestial bodies, and others who create souls. And I'm not sure, as I said, despite those categories, that they're easy to differentiate. All I can tell you is that it seems to be that And this, once again, is limited to my understanding and our understanding as human beings. We think of time, but I'm not sure that this is relevant. But I have no other metaphor. What I understand best about the creator races is many of them are very old, very ancient, and as I said, there are others who predate this universe, so that goes beyond time as we know it. But the ones even within this universe, are very old. And I think that this is the direction for all conscious beings that go through processes of change or evolution. And not to say that other beings don't just stay what they are, that we will all ultimately end up on this path. We will all ultimately end up being some kind of creator. You can see humans are already cloning. In a basic way, we're creators, but we're doing it without the spiritual element, so we don't really get it yet, and we'll be limited in what we're allowed to do. But these other races have evolved spiritually, and so they create from this place of knowing the indivisibility of all things and having compassion for all things, because all things they know are subject to impermanence. That gives them a universal kind of compassion. That doesn't mean they can't be firm or hard, and I've even heard instances where beings are being killed because they have caused more suffering to others. It doesn't mean that there aren't other things that they do, but fundamentally they have compassion and they work for the greater good. And as I try to explain about the Telia and the tall aliens, and I cannot tell you exactly whether or not one or the other or both create souls. All I can tell you is that the Telia said to me, "We are the beloveds, we are the ones who made you, we are God incarnate." And they, on board the tall aliens craft, with both races present, took me into a place where they showed me part of the process of the creation of souls. And as I tried to explain last time, words kind of break down, and I think the best description I had for it was like a unification with the divine, with God, with the light, with consciousness, pure consciousness. But the sense I have is what they are doing is awakening the universe, awakening the cosmos to itself in a different way. And so they do all of this out of love for all states of existence, not just life in the body. And they know that in creating an organism that's in the flesh, that it's going to be subject to impermanence and suffering. But in some way that organism's pure essence will go through a process of transformation. And part of it will always be the same, always be what it was created from. Another part of it, other aspects will go through this period of transformation. And ultimately, I think, be reunited with where it came from. This is where my understanding breaks down. I don't really understand that, except, as I said, that somehow they are trying to awaken God to itself. And I struggle to know whether that means they are God or they realise their divinity. I think it's more the latter, because many of them also recognise something greater than themselves. But I think at the same time, some of them, but not all of them, recognise that while there is something greater than themselves, they are also that thing. It's a little bit like the idea of Christ and the Trinity, the Father, Son and the Holy Ghost. A little bit like that. No offence to my Christian friends out there. So when you think about alien races, and I've now told you about the creator races, I haven't got caught up with who they are and which galaxy they're from. and all of that kind of stuff. What I'm trying to say to you is be interested in what they are like. And other people probably already, well, I know of at least 2 people, but I know there's a lot more people who are having interactions with the creator races. I know that those in power are aware of them and have met some of them. I know that there are all the 4 that I mentioned are represented in this collective of 9. And I know that other people we begin to encounter these creator races. I guess that the difficulty is that some people might not realise that they've encountered one of these races. But in time, I think more people will realise that they are meeting beings who are capable of creating whole worlds and souls and spaces and much larger things other than worlds. And I think what you need to know essentially about them is they have, despite the fear we project onto them, they have universal compassion for life. And they seek to expand awareness and expand emotions in humans and expand feeling. And they seek to lessen suffering, and they move beyond time and space and can move within time and space. And that leads to one final thing about them. I mentioned before, when you take the benevolent engineering model, benevolent creation model, there is this idea of, okay, where did it all come from? If they created from another universe before that, was there a primordial universe that everything began in? I don't know the answer to that. There has been some explanation to try and give me a broader cosmology, but it was still very hard for me to digest. Maybe one day I'll try and convey that. And there is a question that some humans ask and some people believe, and the Vedic texts, I think, talk about similar ideas. In science, Western science, we talk about the material world coming before consciousness. But there is also this idea that the material world came from consciousness, came down from consciousness. I think even people like Michael Cremo have talked about this. He calls it devolution. I believe, because of what I've seen with these entities' ability to be outside of time and space and to move so readily across the universe or between universes, I believe that the origin must in some way have come from consciousness rather than matter. And whether we say that there is something divine, which is kind of like saying there's this huge black box and we don't know what the hell is in it, there is something divine from which all matter came. I'm not sure. I do know that some of them seem to understand this and others don't. I guess you would say, even though they don't treat each other like this, there are levels of awareness within the creator races, different levels of awareness. And I think that although they respect the beliefs of individual races, there are those who will also nurture others to a greater place of understanding. And I think in our own human growth or evolution, this is what we have to stand to gain from contact with aliens and contact with the creator races, is that if we're willing to let go of our projections and move past our fear, feel it, but move past it, let it go, let it do away with it from clouding our judgment. If we're willing to go back to a don't know mind and embrace really not knowing, then they are willing to take us to another place of understanding. They are willing to take us to another place of knowing ultimate reality. Now, we can't really know ultimate reality, and I don't know if they can, but they're as goddamn close to it as you could get. And I think that's what we have to look forward to, that there are beings who look at us perhaps as children, and in some ways they literally did create life on this planet and create us. And so if we're willing to look at them and say, yes, I'm willing to grow, then they will give us that opportunity. They will give each one of us as individuals that opportunity, and collectively as a species that opportunity. But we have to let go of all the crap that has held us back as a race. And individuals will slowly see that about them. They will see what they are really like. They are like God incarnate, love, compassion. There is no evil in that sense. And we have to see that. We have to get past their bodies. We have to get past their technology, their craft, even though those things are amazing. And I'll tell you about that next video. We have to see them as they truly are. And so last video, I think I mentioned as well that I thought life might have started on Mars first and then come here. I guess what I meant was it was started there and then later started here, but at some point those on Mars came to Earth, and whether they were much more evolved than we are now, I don't know. But I think at some point there are beings who have left Earth and beings who have left Mars and have come back since. So we have a lot to learn about our own real history from these different creator races, and a lot to learn about our solar system's history and our galactic history and our broader cosmic history. And I think that's something we should all really, really look forward to. Because if we open our hearts to it, all of that learning awaits us. As I've said before, we're like children dipping our toes into a great cosmic ocean. We have a great deal to learn. Thank you for getting this far, and I hope that that has helped you a little bit to understand what I meant by the creator races. Thank you. See you for the last video. Cowabunga.